Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters. On his way to prison, a man gets intercepted by a secretive government agency who takes him to monitor a secret experiment in exchange for commuting his sentence. This is our raw reaction review for Subject. Yes, Luke, Screambox is at it again with another Screambox original that we got to check out just a little bit ahead of its official release on the service. I mean, gotta say, we've been getting inundated with screeners, lots of great companies coming up in here and just asking us to review these movies, man. But Screambox, they always have been good to us, and they will always be there for us. I like to think so. Very good community over there. Always love it when they have something unique to share. And Subject, I would say, is in that catalog. Very unique, very different. It's a little bit of a genre twist, a little bit of a kind of a blend, if I should say myself, of, kind of creature feature mixed with a little bit of that found footagey kind of surveillance film. It's got a lot of layers to it, I must say.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, we've seen a lot of screeners lately, and like you're saying, I think this is just kind of notable of how flourishing the horror genre is at the moment. And as you're mentioning, a genre twist in a sense, I think that's kind of the norm nowadays. I think we've been saying it quite often now, where I think these creators and filmmakers are really trying to do something a little bit different and not just going with the norm. It's kind of seeing how many different things we can kind of throw in a pot and make work. And I think Subject does that, where we get the little like tagline of it's a found footage, it's a creature feature, but this is also very psychological in a sense, and it goes heavy into the psychological aspect here. And I think that's one of my favorite parts here, is just this kind of psychological melding also with that found footage and some creature feature. And it's one of those things where I think there's something for everyone here.
Yeah, and I think that it does do a serviceable job as far as bringing these kind of genre blends together. I don't think that this is going to be a film that works for everybody. And it's one of those things where it's like 2023 seems to be more about taking risks when it comes to horror, especially when it comes to what we've gotten as far as the found footage genre, with things like The Outwaters, which is getting more and more exposure by the day. And clearly you're starting to see more of a divide amongst people when it comes to their social media reactions, at least the vocal ones, who are out there saying, oh, this movie didn't work for us. We've gotten some comments recently where it's like, now that I think the more general populace is starting to check it out, they're a little bit taken aback by that. And I see a very similar kind of stance to this film. I think that this one, although I don't think it's as great as The Outwaters was, I think that this is one of those films that is going to probably deter some, but also very much intrigue others. I think really you have to be on board for it the second it starts. I think that once you get through that first scene and you really get the setup, you kind of have to know what you're getting into. And I also think on the other side of that, this is a movie that I think I like a little bit more since sitting with it. If we had jumped into the review right away, I think that I may have had a little bit less positive things to say about it, because there's a lot of imagery in here that, now reflecting on it and sitting on it, it was really comparable and really nice and really interesting to me. There's a lot of great stuff there. But overall, I gotta say that this is kind of a tough one for me to full on and recommend.
Yeah, well, and I think looking at this film, where something like The Outwaters, where found footage, we kind of get into a cosmic horror aspect of it as well. I think a hardcore horror fan would, fall into that one and say, okay, this is very intriguing, very different. Now with Subject here, I think maybe where some hardcore horror fans could struggle is that melding of genres, where, if you're a hardcore creature feature fan and you read that tagline, you're going in for a creature feature no matter the found footage. And, because that's just a bonus. And yes, this is a creature feature in a sense, but again, I go back to psychological, and I think it's a little more heavy on the psychological, that if you're a hardcore horror fan looking for that creature feature, I don't know necessarily if you go in with that appetite if you're going to be fed here, just because it does dive into a couple different things in different categories where the focus kind of turns that way. So I could see some hardcore horror fans struggling with this one a bit because of so many meldings of subgenres here, but it's one of those things where, especially with a big general audience being able to be exposed to this, I think they would struggle with it as well, because I think this does ask for a decent amount from their audience. Now, it's not a skin marink in that sense, but as sitting down and kind of really looking at that imagery as you're talking about, it's something that is going to get the wheels turning in your head. It's going to get you kind of wondering, what's real, what's not real, and it's going to keep you off kilter, I think, throughout the entire film. So it's one of those things where recommending this one, I think, is it's hard to define that, because it's so many different tastes, and I could easily seeing hardcore horror fans struggling with this as well as a general audience.
Yeah, and I think that it is one of those things that it plays to me like a really good kind of one of those like creepypasta internet kind of stories, in the sense
Yes.
of like someone getting picked up by a government agency, and at the end of the day, I think the biggest issue I have as far as its kind of presentation, but at the same time, it's like with it being such a small production and really a labor of love for the creatives, it's one of those things where it's like, this does feel very much like a surface level scratch into something that could potentially, if they wanted to continue making things with this industry, or with not the industry, with the agency,
Society, in a sense.
yeah, in a sense, then I think that you could get some really interesting stuff, because there's a lot of great ideas in here. There's a lot of really strong visuals. There's the creature, in a sense, although not your traditional creature feature as the way it's kind of billing itself, in the sense of like having it go around and maul people and things like that. It is very much more of an emotional connection, and it's very much one of those things where it's like, it tends to go through this metamorphosis through the film that it's so different than any take I've seen on a creature recently, where they decided to go, this is what people would expect, but we're going to do the exact opposite. But they execute that very well, I think. I think that there's a lot of elements and dialogue pieces in here revolving around our main character of Willem and the creature that's I really enjoyed, and I did not expect when I sat down to watch this. So in that aspect, I gotta say that I went into this expecting one thing and I got something different. Does it all work for me? Not really, but at the same time, I think that it presents a lot of great ideas and a lot of strong groundwork for what could be to come later on down the road. And I do think that this is a very niche film. And I think that there's going to be, I would not be surprised if, as the years go on down the road, more and more people start to turn to this and enjoy it, especially, like I said, if they choose to expand on this a little bit. Because, again, the ideas are very solid. The execution is done well for the most part, but it is one of those things where it's like, you almost just want a little bit more, and I don't know if that gives you the most satisfying experience because of that.
Yeah, and that's where it's like, this idea really does open up a lot of questions, and I think maybe an audience will want to go in having those questions answered, and that's not what the film is. It's more of kind of leaving you with your own experience, in a sense, especially as I end up watching this twice already, and it's like, I think even that second time around, as the general story and you're watching it that second viewing, you're picking up on a couple extra things that maybe you did not see that first time around. So, and it's nothing that's going to, if anything, it's going to leave you asking more questions rather than kind of getting those answers that you came into that second viewing for. So I can see this being a little frustrating for audiences, especially because, as we've talked about, this melding of genres now is becoming a little more commonplace, but it's still fairly new here for audiences to kind of adapt to and go into, especially if you're expecting just a basic creature feature that happens to be found footage, because that's not what you're getting here. And that's kind of almost what I didn't watch the trailer prior to this, so I didn't know what to expect going in. I thought more so that's where you're going to get, but this is very much a one location we're dealing with almost a one-man show. I mean, we kind of jump
Hmm.
out every so often, but it's very much just a one-man show dealing with this character more so psychologically than anything else. So I could easily see audiences being, I guess, maybe underwhelmed if you're going in for that found footage or that creature feature, because that's not what this is. This is a little bit more than that, and it does ask a decent amount from its audience.
It does. And you know what? I was honestly not expecting to be challenged that much from this. Again, like you, I did not watch a trailer, but from the description and just kind of what it was, I remember we had a conversation after you had watched it. I didn't even realize when I had read through the description, it totally blanked out of my mind that this was even going to be presented in like a found footage surveillance style. And, you know, I think that that's really cool. And I think that there's a lot of great ideas here. And I think there's a lot of confidence and there's a lot of strong elements that are brought to the table. And I think in the presentation, it's done really well. I think that the cast here, although very limited, is really strong. I mean, Tristan Barr is playing double duty here as not only our director, but also as a character in this who pops up frequently. And I think he brings a lot of interesting. He comes in to more present more questions than answers. But I
Yes.
think that he plays a very interesting character. He's a very kind of witty kind of interaction between him and the character of Willem. And
Yes,
I
he
think
plays.
Steven. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I think that adds a lot, especially with this being a one-man show and having Willem just dealing with the issue at hand, and then having that character come in and ask him a bunch of questions that is just frustrating to our character really adds to that tension. And I think they play off each other tremendously.
Absolutely. And, you know, one of the other characters I want to highlight, of course, is our lead, Willem, who does a great job. He's played by Stephen Phillips, who has to go through a lot here. I mean, obviously, with it being kind of this psychological, contained in one place movie, there is going to be a lot of moments in which, you know, it's like, how many days have I been in here? You know, where's my mind going? Am I losing it a little bit? And I think he does a very good job of bringing that together. There are some moments, I have to admit, where his performance, as far as these little I will say outside of the room without spoiling anything, moments involving him and some substances, that's I could definitely feel like, okay, it's a little hammy in that sense of like, I don't know if that was presented in the most accurate or the most realistic way in my sense. But I mean, that could just be a personal thing of just knowing people who have delved into that world personally. So it's kind of like, you know, I've seen how that affects people. So it's one of those things where it's like, that's my only real gripe with that performance. Other than that, I think everything in the room and everything they do with the monster is wonderful. And I got to say, the creature effects are done really well. If you're a practical effects person, this is all practical for everything you see for the creature. I'm like 99% certain everything on screen is practical, and that's a huge plus. And again, it's not your typical way of going about it. They really do something different here and unique with this creature that I think, you know, I gotta say it, if you're going into this looking for that monster, you know, being the subject and ripping people up and stuff, you're not going to get that. It's much more psychological. It's much more deep. It's deeper than that in how they present this creature, and I enjoyed that. I thought that that was a nice risk.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of character development in this film that I was not prepared for. I didn't know we were going to go that more of a deep dive, especially with that character. When you settle into this film at the beginning, okay, you're like, okay, I'm going to be stuck in this room with our main character, Willem. But then we take a break sometimes and we get those flashbacks, and we're outside of the room and we're meeting his family and his life prior to the events that have happened that led him here. And I think that's great character development. I think for me, maybe my biggest critique here ends up being, and maybe it's a necessary evil, I guess, especially when you're confined to a room and it's just one character. Sometimes the dialogue tends to be a little bit on the nose for me, especially when he's like speaking to the camera. It's like, okay, maybe a poor choice in dialogue there, and maybe we could have, cut it down a little bit. And sometimes I think, as you're saying, in terms of as we step out, there's sometimes some drug use, and I think maybe at that point, it turns into a very compelling scene, I think. But I think at some points, maybe some of that stuff, maybe craftier, maybe a little editing in terms of shortening it up and kind of letting us understand what it is without actually showing us, because I think we can connect those dots a little bit more. But yeah, I think honestly that's my biggest critique, is some of the dialogue tends to be on the nose a little bit. But again, it doesn't take me out of it. It might be a necessary evil because he's only confined to this room and he's speaking out toward, this greater power, secret society, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't really take me out, but I think maybe that could have been better. But overall, I think the emotion that Willem does show is something where it does become believable. The agitation that he gets, the progressive agitation, I just love this from going in from that found footage creature feature. I ended up coming out as loving the psychological aspect of it.
Yeah, I think that was probably the strongest element. That, and for me, the creature effects, as well as the performances within the room, I thought were very well done. So, I think that there is a lot of strong parts to this, but I have a hard time saying this is going to work for everybody. Like it comes to with a lot of experimental horror right now. So it's one of those things where it's like, I would say I'm going to recommend this though. I think that this is definitely worth a watch. But it is one of those things where I totally understand people, coming at us and being like, oh no, I didn't get this. I didn't like this. I think that this was a lot of fun and will definitely benefit for some further expansion, some people going online and trying to figure out what all the symbolism means and what everything means as far as just the way this story unfolds. And I'm very much positive on this film, but it's more of a cautious positive, I guess I gotta say, if I'm being honest, because it's one of those things where it's like, I will probably honestly go back and check this out, but it is going to be one of those things where I just know that people are going to watch this and they're not going to get anything out of it because they want everything kind of handed to them. And this is not a movie that's going to do that.
Not at all. And, for me, I think an audience has to know what they're in for here. I can see people being negative on it going in for one of those aspects. It's certainly a creature feature because, yes, there's a creature in here, but it's presented very differently than what you're going to be thinking of. Now, do I think this is worth a watch? Absolutely. It's a lean, mean runtime. It's about an hour 17. And it's something that, sometimes these films of when you're confined to a room can be a little lethargic and slow moving. This one, I think, moves pretty quickly, especially with the issues presented at hand. So you definitely, you're in and you're out. So it's like you don't feel like you're lingering at all. It's definitely worth a viewing because it does present something different. Now, I could see someone being a little bit more negative on this one if you're going in for the aspect that, again, that creature features just found footage, anything like that, and getting a more psychological study. I would urge someone to even watch this a second time. Listen, this is going to be on Screambox. It's going to be one of those things where it's easily digestible. You can turn on. And after that second viewing for me, I'll be honest, it's like one of those ones that gives you a bunch more questions, but it's like a Skinamarink in that sense, where it is something that's going to challenge you a little bit more. So I definitely think this is worth a horror fan's time. I think it's going to lead to those endless discussions of, what this can mean, what that can mean. So I definitely think this is worth someone's time to actually sit down and watch. And I think you'll be surprised at the content within.
Absolutely, I agree. But alrighty, guys, I think that's going to wrap us up for our review here of Subject. Let us know if you were going to check this one out when it drops on August 22nd. That is this Tuesday. Yes, and we also got to sit down and speak with the director, Tristan Barr. Lovely gentleman, wonderful conversation. We don't just talk about his film. We do talk a little bit about Sycophant and kind of how, we have these two films that take place in one location, as well as we got to talk about just Australian horror and the impact that it has kind of had, building up over this last year. And I want to say pretty underrated in general, because I think there's a lot of great Australian horror films that are finally starting to get their due here in the States. So definitely urge you to check out that interview. It was a lot of fun to have. And he's just overall a really nice guy. Other than that, we got a lot of great stuff up on the channel. Sunday Scaries is up, of course, with a lot of big news stories. It was just a crazy week for news. And we have a lot of great stuff coming. Like we said, this past week was a lot of just us, prepping and getting things ready to go. So this week is going to be a lot of releasing. So just be ready because there's going to be content out just about every day. And yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And if you're local to the area and you want to come support us on September 16th for the Akron Independent Horror Short Film Festival, we will be there showing our film Sycophant. And yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. You can get your tickets at theakroncivictheater.com. So be there, hang out with us, meet us, do whatever you want to do. Come see our film, come support dirt cheap independent horror, because this is independent horror. The film we talked about, what we made was like $500 and some popsicle sticks compared to this. So it's like, let's go out there, let's support it. And yeah, guys, that's gonna wrap us up here. So until next time, I am Dylan Newell,
and I'm Luke Janesco,
and remember, stay scared.